Hey guys, so I just wanted to give you an update on the progress I made today. It was a longer day, but it feels like finally got stuff done in the last little bit. So I'll run you through. Hopefully this will be a good catch up for David, so he knows what's up and what the changes have been um, intended for. Um, so the layout of this has changed a little bit. You can see we've got two different options here on the group routes. So this one has a similar option. There's only one on the update credentials because we're only allowing people to update by spreadsheet. But while we're on the add credentials, you can spreadsheet or form entry. In my opinion, this is satisfying what the users want, which is basically that both look like options, but one's a clear default. Um, that's fine, in my opinion. I'm not crazy about how it looks right now, but it's sort of without really knowing what I want it to look like, it's difficult to do much more to it. I think this is definitely like MVP. It's fine. So if we upload the spreadsheet, there's just a couple minor changes. On the template, I made the icon smaller. Someone gave me the feedback that it was like a little bit hypnotizy when at the size it was, so I just shrank it. I updated these colors a little bit just so that it looked less like everything was in an error state. And maybe it looks just a little bit friendlier when you have something selected. Um, Now I know this might be a point of contention. I know David mentioned that he spent a lot of time working on the verbiage of map 2. Unfortunately, pretty much everybody that I talked to found that confusing, and they had the impression that that was more of a technical or like math related thing that they just didn't get. And one person I had look at it like basically like stopped at multiple points in this and went back because they're like they couldn't get over map to attribute. They just like really couldn't jive with it. Normally, I wouldn't put so much weight heavily on one person's opinion like that, but it seemed like generally it wasn't specific enough. It could be something like if we really stuck to our guns and said like, yeah, mapping, that's what we're going to call it. We could own it and maybe it would work that way. But I think given that we had talked about having like a skip button, it seemed like we could probably just make this slightly more intuitive. I didn't really change any of the layout stuff that David had. I just went with assign instead of map to, which was something that came up in the feedback. And then the key action is assign. So you select your attribute and then hit assign. I think that's way more straightforward for the average user. There's just like much less room for interpretation. And I'll go through here. Um, if you're not importing this column, I thought this was kind of a slick way to get around having a skip button. Um, the assign button says skip. So that way, we don't need to train the user to look for two different buttons. It's still really slick. I noticed David had the thing where you can just keep your mouse in the same spot and run through, which is like really nice. We get to maintain that, but the verbiage is just a little bit more skip specific. And then we have something that looks like it's going to be skipped a little more obviously than something that's been assigned to. One of the things that was tricky for people when I showed them was that it would say map to attribute, and then it would still say map to attribute without really explaining what had changed. So we're just trying to be more explicit, say like, yeah, you did a good thing, we've matched up your column, don't worry about it anymore. So I just think that that verbiage is a bit of a nicer change, and there's some greater specificity around like little actions like reassign instead of edit. And like if this column had never been touched, it would say edit at the beginning. So I think that's just more specific and user friendly. Moved all of the step through stuff to the bottom. Don't think that there's a little bit of validation, just making sure that you've gone through all 5. Nobody found that counter helpful because David did such a good job of having this thing go clicker click that nobody really used it to track progress. So I just got rid of it. This will show some context for the next step, but even that I'm not sure is super necessary. It's just sort of in keeping with the way that we have this component everywhere else in the site. Going through, I changed the layout of this one. I spent a lot of time on it. I'm still not super happy with it, but I'll tell you the things that I needed to respond to. Really was that the errors are not actionable, and it's not clear what would happen if you skip them. So it's just trying to be more hand-holdy. Review these warnings before continuing. These are the errors. The logic behind showing those is still the same, but basically the confirmation is right here. You need to either change your records and re-upload your spreadsheet or continue if these warnings are okay. We warn you if you think we might be creating duplicate credentials. So then you know why, and then you have the chance to respond right there. Again, I'm not totally set on this, but I think it's an improvement because the action is right there. And the feedback that I had with the 3 toggles was that it seemed like 3 different phrasings of the same thing. And maybe in time, when the users kind of like sussed out what they all mean, it would be easier to have the 3 toggles in one place. But really, I think the option is like confirm that I've seen the warnings and I'm okay with it. And I choose yes, I want to publish them right away. Because really by hitting continue, you're saying that you want to create the credentials. At least that was my understanding. I think this is just a much simpler interaction. We don't have that like the weird 3-way binary toggle thing. I didn't get rid of that. I just commented out the 3rd toggle. I know that this is not working to have all of David's logic in it. This is just sort of, I hid that toggle and I wanted to get a sense of this. I'd really like to show this to the team members I had look at this and maybe another person at the office and get their opinion on it in relation to the old one. Just because I want to make sure it's a step in the right direction before we commit. I think it really just need like another set of eyes on it. So don't panic if this thing looks really different or doesn't seem like it's totally resolved, because I don't think it is. But yeah, we'll run with that for now, I think. So just added clear notice that, hey, we'll send you an email. You're probably not going to read those unless it's taking super long. I changed these auxiliary messages on this page. The biggest feedback that I got on this page was that it needs to look like you accomplished the thing that you set out to do. It was just like the list before, and that's probably just because David was waiting for me to run with it. But I used this graphic I'd come up with kind of in the planning stage. And then we've got all our, like, any action related to this flow is just over here. So this was something users were like, we need to have that review step. I really want to see the review step. Can I click on this and review the ones I just created? I think we talked about this a long time ago and decided it was a little bit redundant, but I don't think we can get away from having it. It's a pretty big departure from our current paradigm, so it's going to shock people if we get it out. I think just having it as an option that you can review is totally fine. Like review published ones, review unpublished. If we have that filter on the credentials list for the transaction, I think this is kind of a trivial thing that really needs to be there from the user's perspective. I changed create more credentials instead of going to the beginning of this flow, which would have you create more credentials for the same group. Instead, it goes to the choose group screen. And this was based on some more feedback, was like, why would I add 2 separate spreadsheets to the same group right in a row? You would think that you'd have all that data in one place. I thought that was a very reasonable thing to assume. If you did have another spreadsheet like MHFA, if you're uploading one for each course, that seems like a totally reasonable thing. Maybe you want to do several of these, like one after the other. So that will take you to the choose group screen, and then you can choose which group to create credentials for and start the flow again. So I thought that was an improvement as well. Just wanted that to be clear. So one last thing, I just want to talk about that success screen again. Going through. This is my favorite part when everything's already been remembered and you have the same columns. This feels like magic. Okay. So at this stage, the only thing, these are like the auxiliary, where the auxiliary success messages will go. I have the conditional logic for these guys kind of commented out in line. So this should show if you create credentials and the intention was update. The reason that I have it that way is the user's going through the create flow. They want to get the create success message that tells them like, yeah, you created the credentials. Oh, by the way, we also updated these one or two that you happened to update while you were in this flow. So it's just going to account for those the mixing of those two use cases. But these success messages all should be in line, and they should show up with the comments that just say the intention that they should be used for. So that should be pretty easy to get working. And yeah, like if we had published right away, there would be one that shows for credits deducted. I think these guys just look really slick. And actually, like in comparison to the previous page where we had those massive alerts, it makes me really want to tidy them up. These look so much cleaner in comparison. Yeah, so I think that's it. This should change. You know what this does, and if the user had kind of been, you know, looking for this button in the bottom corner repeatedly, this will just kind of close the flow and go back to the credentials list, and that will end the flow. Yeah, so I think that's everything. Take a look at the sprint here. I've got a couple odds and ends. Emails. This guy's finished up. This guy's finished up. Yeah, just kind of odds and ends. I've got edits to emails, I think. We've got our QA. There were a couple of bugs that I logged this evening. Clear that I can... That page is waiting. It's just commented out. This guy. We can talk about this in DevSync, but it's basically... it's just very strange that you're able to select a date and not get feedback when these guys are null. Like that I can change the date to a format that breaks for stuff that's visible just feels really weird. I mean, maybe we want to do that, but it seems like a mistake to let them input stuff that they could see as wrong and not give them the feedback or prevent them from doing it or something. So like, I think this is really wonky. I really think we should do something about it, but I'm not exactly sure what. David, just for your knowledge, we ran through this in a DevSync, and Alan decided basically to make this a must-have unless it would be really, really hard to do. It's if you have a first name and a last name in separate columns to be able to concatenate them and use that as a recipient name. The reason that that's a must-have is because if we're going to be accepting like a spreadsheet from any kind of platform, we need to be able to account for, you know, the cases where those are separate, and we have a lot of issuers that actually have data like that. So unless it's going to cause some problems and like push the sprint back a few days, Alan said like we should definitely have that in here. Otherwise, we'd consider bumping it. So we need that review screen, which I guess is going to look kind of like how we have it now. It'll just be that filtered transaction view. Yeah, and then just an error when you have if every row is an error and you click create, you get a success message even though nothing happened. Yeah, everything else is... I left a video for you on this card that's really specific. It is nice to have, so don't worry if you don't get around to it. Otherwise, I think that's everything up to date. just send me a direct message. I'll be on a little early tomorrow and catch up. Hope you had a good long weekend, David, and I'll talk to you guys all tomorrow.